crack echoes through the grand hall. Then another. Gru stares as the man across from him bends forward, his expensive suit splitting along the spine. Black wings unfold. Antennae twitch. Hundreds of former villains cheer like they are watching a magic trick, but Gru does not move. He recognizes the smile beneath that monstrous cockroach shell. Maxime Le Mal, his oldest rival. And although Maxime is performing for the crowd, those burning eyes are fixed on Gru alone. This reunion was supposed to be a simple undercover mission. Instead, an enemy Gru humiliated decades ago has returned stronger, stranger, and ready to settle a score. Only hours earlier, Gru had walked into Lycée Pas Bon, wearing the nervous expression of a man returning to the place where every embarrassing memory was born. The school had trained young villains to lie, steal, and conquer the world before lunchtime. Its stone corridors still smelled of smoke, chemicals, and old grudges. Gru adjusted his scarf and tried to look confident while secretly hoping nobody remembered his teenage years. They remembered everything. Former classmates whispered. Teachers watched from shadowy balconies. Somewhere, a trapdoor opened for no reason and swallowed a waiter. Gru barely noticed. He was searching for one face. Then Maxime arrived. He entered beneath a spotlight, with Valentina beside him and a swarm of tiny cockroaches clearing his path. Time had not softened him. If anything, it had polished his ego until it shone brighter than the chandeliers. Maxime greeted the room like a king returning to his kingdom, but when he saw Gru, his smile tightened. Years ago, both boys had performed at the school talent show. Maxime believed Gru had stolen his song, his costume, and the victory that should have made him legendary. Gru remembered the story differently. Unfortunately, Maxime had spent his entire life feeding that humiliation until it became hatred. Their conversation began with fake smiles and polite insults. Then the mask slipped. Maxime stepped onto the stage to receive an award, spreading his arms as applause filled the hall. He spoke about evolution, superiority, and finally becoming indestructible. Gru's eyes narrowed. Something moved beneath Maxime's collar. A thin black leg crawled over his shoulder. Another pushed through his sleeve. The audience leaned closer. Maxime laughed, ripped open his shirt, and revealed what he had done to himself. He had fused his body with cockroach DNA. His skin hardened. His limbs twisted. Wings burst from his back with a sharp, papery snap. The smell of chemicals and burnt sugar rolled across the room. Silence. Then everyone screamed. Maxime flew above the tables, smashing decorations and showering guests with broken glass. He wanted admiration. He wanted fear. Most of all, he wanted Gru to admit that Maxime Le Mal had finally become the greater villain. But Gru was no longer the insecure boy from that talent show. He touched the hidden communicator beneath his jacket. Doors exploded inward. Anti-Villain League agents stormed the hall. Nets fired. Cockroaches scattered across the floor like spilled pepper. Maxime turned toward Gru, realization draining the triumph from his face. Gru had never come for the reunion. He had come for him. The capture was fast, loud, and deeply satisfying. Maxime fought, hissed, and hurled furniture, but the agents overwhelmed him. Metal restraints locked around his transformed arms. As they dragged him away, he shouted that Gru had made the worst mistake of his life. Gru answered with a small wave, pretending the threat meant nothing. Yet Maxime's final expression followed him long after the school disappeared behind the armored transport. It was not anger alone, it was certainty, the look of a man who already knew exactly where to strike. Back home, the world felt softer. Lucy rushed to greet Gru while Margo, Edith, and Agnes crowded around, demanding every detail of the mission. Minions bounced through the halls, carrying bottles, diapers, and objects no baby should ever be allowed to touch. At the center of the chaos sat the newest member of the family, Gru Jr., small, round, and completely devoted to making his father suffer. Gru lifted his son with a hopeful smile. The baby stared at him. No laugh, no affection, just cold judgment. Then Gru Jr. grabbed his nose, twisted hard, and kicked him in the chin. Lucy tried not to laugh. Gru tried not to cry. He had defeated supervillains, stolen the moon, and survived an army of purple minions, yet one tiny child could destroy him before breakfast. Still, Gru held the baby close. Beneath the bruised pride, his chest warmed. This noisy house was everything he once believed he could never have. A wife, 3 daughters, a son. a family that had transformed a lonely villain into someone willing to risk anything for them. Far away, metals screamed inside a prison transport. Cockroaches poured through the ventilation system. Guards shouted. Lights flickered red. A dark figure tore free from his restraints as Valentina's aircraft descended through the night. Maxime climbed aboard, his wings trembling with rage. On a screen before him appeared a photograph of Gru's family. His claw stopped over the baby's face. Maxime smiled. Gru thought the mission was over. He had no idea the real attack had just begun. The warning arrived before sunrise. Gru stood in the kitchen, half awake, holding Gru Jr. at arm's length while the baby tried to bite his thumb. Then the windows slammed shut. Steel shields dropped over the glass. Red lights swept across the walls. Minions screamed and dove beneath furniture. Silas Ramsbottom appeared on the security screen with one sentence that turned the room cold. Maxime Le Mal had escaped. Not alone. Valentina had broken him free, and every anti-Villain League tracker had gone dark. Gru looked toward Lucy. Her smile vanished. Upstairs, the girls were still sleeping, unaware that a transformed madman had promised to hunt them. Within minutes, agents filled the house. Drawers were emptied. Photographs disappeared into boxes. Silas explained the plan without softening it. Gru and his family could not stay. Maxime knew their faces, their routines, even where the children slept. Until he was captured, they would enter protection under new identities. Gru's jaw tightened. He wanted to fight. Running felt too much like surrender. But then Gru Jr. reached for him, tiny fingers curling around his scarf, and the argument died in his throat. Pride was expensive. His family could not afford the price. By morning, the home they had built together stood silent, stripped of every trace that they had ever lived there. The minions did not take the news well. Most were transported to Anti-Villain League headquarters, where their grief lasted exactly long enough for someone to uncover a vending machine. 5 of them, however, were selected for a secret experiment. Scientists strapped them into glowing chambers and injected them with a strange serum designed to create super-powered agents. The doors opened. Smoke rolled across the laboratory. One minion stretched taller than the equipment. Another became impossibly strong. One could fly, one moved like lightning, and another fired destructive energy from his eye. For 3 glorious seconds, they looked heroic. Then they destroyed half the building. Gru saw none of it. He was driving toward Mayflower, an immaculate suburban town where every lawn was trimmed, every house sparkled, and every neighbor seemed dangerously interested in everyone else's business. Their new home was bright, expensive, and completely unfamiliar. Silas handed them folders containing their new lives. Gru became Chet Cunningham, a salesman specializing in solar panels. Lucy became Blanche Cunningham, a professional hairstylist. Margo, Edith, and Agnes received new names, new histories, and strict orders never to reveal who they really were. Agnes stared down at her folder. But lying is bad. Gru opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Lucy for help. Lucy knelt beside her. Sometimes people hide the truth to protect someone they love. Agnes frowned. She understood the words but not the feeling behind them. To her, honesty was simple. Good people told the truth. Bad people lied. Gru watched that certainty crack slightly, and guilt pressed against his ribs. He had spent years teaching the girls to trust him. Now survival required him to teach them how to pretend. Their first day in Mayflower unfolded like a disaster wearing a cheerful smile. Gru tried introducing himself to the neighbors as Chet, but his fake laugh sounded like a lawnmower refusing to start. Lucy practiced talking about hair products she did not understand. Edith explored the house for escape routes. Agnes worried that leaving her pet goat behind meant the goat would believe she had abandoned him. Margo said almost nothing. She stood near the window, watching children ride bicycles past their house, knowing she had to start over again without explaining why. The hardest part came at school. Margo entered beneath rows of bright banners and instantly felt every eye turn toward the new girl. A confident student named Poppy Prescott ruled the hall with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She watched Margo struggle through an awkward introduction, then walked past without offering help. Agnes faced a different crisis when her teacher demanded that every student choose a personal motto. She refused to say anything untrue, even something harmless. The other children laughed. Her hands tightened around her pencil. She wanted Gru, not Chet, not the nervous man pretending to sell solar panels. Her father. Meanwhile, Lucy began work at a luxury salon. Her first client demanded perfection while speaking into a phone and barely looking up. Lucy smiled, lifted a pair of scissors, and whispered that she could handle this. She could not. Hair tangled around the brush. Dye splashed across the counter. A burning smell filled the room. The client finally looked into the mirror and screamed. Lucy ran. Fast. Through the salon, across the parking lot, and straight into the family car before anyone could stop her. That evening, Gru stood outside beneath the soft glow of suburban streetlights, exhausted but relieved that they had survived one full day. A voice came from the darkness. "I know who you are." Gru turned. Poppy Prescott sat in a lawn chair across the street, holding a tablet. On its screen played old footage of Gru stealing the moon. She smiled slowly. "Hello, Gru." Gru's hand moved toward his freeze ray. Poppy did not flinch. She simply tapped the tablet, and the screen changed from old footage of the moon theft to a live view of the Cunningham house. Lucy was inside helping Agnes with homework. Margo sat alone on the stairs. Gru Jr. crawled beneath the dining table, dragging one of Gru's shoes behind him. Poppy smiled. "Relax. I'm not going to expose you. Not yet." She knew everything. His real name, his history, the Anti-Villain League, even Maxime Le Mal. Gru stared at the girl across the street and saw something uncomfortably familiar in her expression. Confidence built over loneliness. Ambition hiding behind a joke. She did not want money. She wanted training. Poppy Prescott dreamed of becoming a villain, and she wanted Gru to help with her first great crime. Her target was Lycée Pas-Bon's most valuable treasure, Lenny, the school mascot. Not a trophy. Not a statue. A living honey badger with claws sharp enough to shred metal and a temper that had terrified generations of students. Poppy believed stealing Lenny would guarantee her admission into the school. Gru refused immediately. He had children to protect, a false identity to maintain, and a cockroach supervillain hunting him. Breaking into his old school with a teenage stranger was madness. Poppy lifted one finger over the tablet. "One message," she whispered, "and Mayflower learns who Chet Cunningham really is." Gru hated blackmail. He respected the technique, but he hated being on the receiving end. That night, he tried to explain the situation to Lucy without alarming the girls. He failed. Lucy crossed her arms, listening as Gru described Poppy's plan, then stared at him in disbelief. "You're taking a child to steal a dangerous animal? When you say it like that, it sounds irresponsible." "It is irresponsible." Gru lowered his voice. Beneath the defensiveness, fear tightened his chest. Every decision felt wrong. If he refused, Poppy could expose them. If he agreed, he could lead danger straight to the family. He had spent years believing that strength meant controlling every problem himself. Now he could not even protect his children without lying to them. From the hallway, Margo heard everything. She said nothing. Later, Gru found her sitting outside, watching the lights of Mayflower shimmer across perfectly clean streets. He sat beside her, leaving space between them. "You are unhappy," he said. Margo shrugged. "I'm fine." Gru knew that answer. Villains used it. Fathers used it too. She finally admitted that she hated pretending. At school, people asked where she came from, what her old friends were like, why her family moved. Every answer had to be fake. She felt as if her real life had been erased overnight. Gru's throat tightened. "Your real life is not erased." "It kind of feels like it." He wanted to promise that everything would return to normal, but normal had never lasted long for them. So he placed an awkward hand on her shoulder and stayed quiet. No speech, no solution, just warmth beneath the cold night air. For once, that was enough. Hours later, Gru joined Poppy outside Lycée Pas-Bon. Two minions came along, wearing black suits and expressions of complete professional seriousness. One immediately walked into a wall. The other stole a torch from a statue and set his own trousers on fire. Poppy stared. "These are your elite assistants? They are having an off night." The school rose above them like a sleeping monster. Towers leaned over black cliffs. Windows glowed red through the fog. Somewhere deep inside, Lenny released a growl that vibrated through the stone. They entered through an old tunnel Gru remembered from his student days. The air smelled of dust, wet fur, and chemicals. Every step awakened another memory. Failed inventions, cruel teachers, Maxime's mocking laughter. Gru told himself he had changed. Yet as he slipped past rotating blades and disabled security traps, the old thrill returned. His movements became lighter. His smile sharpened. Poppy noticed. "You missed this." "No, you're smiling. I smile when I am terrified." They reached the mascot chamber. Behind reinforced bars, Lenny paced in darkness. Yellow eyes opened. Claws scraped the floor. Poppy's confidence disappeared. Gru saw her hands tremble. For the first time, she looked less like a criminal mastermind and more like a frightened girl desperate to prove she belonged somewhere. Gru stepped in front of her. "Stay behind me." The cage opened. Chaos exploded. Lenny launched through the air. Minions screamed. Poppy ducked beneath snapping jaws. Gru fired a tranquilizer dart, missed, and hit a stone gargoyle. The creature crashed through the floor. Alarms erupted. Red lights spun across the walls. Finally, Gru wrapped Lenny in a curtain while Poppy secured the transport cage. Together, they dragged the furious animal toward the exit as footsteps thundered behind them. They escaped by seconds, or so they thought. High above the courtyard, Principal Ubelschleck stood at a shattered window, watching Gru disappear into the fog. Her ancient face tightened with recognition. Then she reached for a phone. "Maxime," she said. "I found him." Principal Ubelschleck's message reached Maxime before Gru returned home. A map appeared across the cockpit screen. Mayflower, one quiet street, one bright house, one family hiding behind borrowed names. Maxime leaned closer as Principal described the break-in, the stolen's mascot, and the man she had recognized moving through the school like a ghost from the past. Valentina smiled, expecting celebration. Maxime did not celebrate. His claws tightened around the seat. Gru had escaped him once. That would not happen again. This time, Maxime would not attack the father first. He would take the one thing Gru could not replace, his son. Back in Mayflower, Poppy unlocked Lenny's cage inside her secret hideout. The honey badger exploded into the room, smashed a chair, tore through a curtain, then climbed onto Gru's back and refused to move. Poppy laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. Gru did not laugh. Every alarm in his body was screaming. Ubelschlecht had seen him. He could feel it. The break-in had been too loud, too messy, too familiar. "We have to move," he said. Poppy's smile faded. "You promised to help me get into Lycée Pas Bon. I promised to steal the mascot. The mascot is stolen. You also promised nobody would know." Gru looked at the shattered window, the injured minions, and Lenny chewing through a metal lamp. "Technically, very few people know." Poppy's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the confidence fell away. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Gru froze. That was the truth hiding beneath every excuse. If Maxime had found Mayflower, the family would disappear again. Another house, another set of names, another life erased before it could become real. Poppy had blackmailed him, threatened him, dragged him back into crime. Yet beneath all that ambition was a lonely girl who had finally found someone who understood her. Gru remembered Margo sitting outside beneath the streetlights. He hated the idea of doing that to another child. "I don't know," he said quietly. Poppy looked away before he could see how much the answer hurt. At home, the disguise was beginning to crack from every direction. Lucy's salon client had tracked her to Mayflower and was demanding revenge for the ruined haircut. Agnes had stopped speaking in class because every sentence felt like another lie. Margo had become the target of older students who mocked her clothes, her silence, even the strange way her father dropped her off each morning while pretending not to watch from the car. Gru noticed everything. He simply did not know how to fix any of it. Then Gru Jr. crawled across the kitchen floor carrying a photograph. It showed the family at home before Mayflower. Lucy laughing. Edith hanging upside down from the sofa. Agnes hugging her goat. Margo leaning against Gru's shoulder. The baby slapped the picture against the floor and looked up at his father. Gru crouched beside him. "This is us," he whispered. "The real us." Gru Jr. grabbed his nose. Gru almost smiled. Then the security system chirped. One camera had gone dark, then another. Silence. Gru's blood turned cold. He moved fast, lifting the baby and calling for Lucy. The lights flickered. Somewhere outside, metal scraped against stone. Minions rushed toward the windows. Edith grabbed a weapon. Margo pulled Agnes close. A shadow moved across the roof. Gru fired through the ceiling. Nothing. He ordered everyone into the safe room, but before Lucy could close the steel door, an explosion rocked the house. Glass burst inward. Smoke poured through the hallway. Shapes moved inside it. Cockroaches, hundreds of them, crawling across the walls, swarming beneath doors, cutting power lines. Maxime's voice filled the house through hidden speakers. "Gru, my old friend." Gru held his son tighter. "You wanted to humiliate me," Maxime continued. "So now I will show you what humiliation truly feels like." The front wall exploded. Maxime stepped through the dust, wings spread, body gleaming beneath the emergency lights. Valentina moved beside him, calm and smiling. Gru raised his weapon. Maxime raised one claw. Wrapped inside it was a tiny yellow blanket. Gru looked down. His arms were empty. The baby he had been holding was only a stuffed toy, placed there in the confusion. Upstairs, a window stood open, and from somewhere beyond the smoke came Gru Jr.'s frightened cry. Gru heard the cry again, above him. He ran through the smoke, shoulder first, into the staircase, climbing 2 steps at a time while cockroaches poured down the walls. Lucy shouted behind him, but the house shook, beams cracking, plaster raining from the ceiling. Gru reached the nursery and found the window torn open. Outside, Maxime's aircraft rose above Mayflower, engines glowing red against the night. Gru Jr. pressed both hands against the glass. His tiny mouth opened. "Da!" One word. The first Gru had ever heard from him. Then the aircraft vanished into the clouds. Gru stood frozen at the window, the sound tearing through him harder than any weapon. For months, the baby had pushed him away, bitten him, kicked him, stared at him as if fatherhood were a crime. Now, at the worst possible moment, Gru Jr. had called for him. Gru's fingers tightened around the broken frame until blood ran over his knuckles. Lucy grabbed his arm. "We'll get him back." Gru looked at her, but there was something different in his eyes. No panic now, no confusion, only rage. The family escaped through the damaged safe room tunnel while anti-Villain League agents surrounded the house. Silas demanded that Gru stay put. Maxime had chosen the battlefield, and charging blindly into it could get the baby killed. Gru listened for exactly 4 seconds before stealing an armored vehicle. Lucy jumped into the passenger seat. Margo, Edith, and Agnes climbed into the back. "No," Gru said. "You stay with Silas." Margo met his eyes. "We're not losing another home." Edith loaded a dart launcher. Agnes held the family photograph against her chest. Gru understood. Maxime had mistaken them for Gru's weakness. He was about to discover they were the reason Gru never stayed down. Poppy appeared from the shadows with Lenny beside her and a tracking device in her hand. During the kidnapping, she had attached a locator to Maxime's aircraft. The signal pointed toward an abandoned observatory beyond the city, where Maxime had built a laboratory beneath the mountain. Gru stared at her. "You followed him?" "I'm a villain," Poppy replied. "We do irresponsible things." For the first time that night, Gru smiled. At Anti-Villain League headquarters, the Mega Minions received their first emergency mission. The briefing was simple. Fly to the mountain, assist Gru, and avoid unnecessary destruction. They destroyed the briefing room while taking off. One blasted through the roof. Another stretched across 3 streets and became tangled around a radio tower. The flying minion forgot how to stop, crashed through a billboard, then continued with the billboard wrapped around his body. Silas watched them disappear into the distance and slowly removed his glasses. This was a terrible idea. Inside Maxime's laboratory, Gru Jr. sat strapped beneath a circle of mechanical arms. He kicked at the restraints while Maxime adjusted a vial of glowing green liquid. Valentina watched from the control platform, uneasy for the first time. "You wanted revenge against Gru," she said. "Not a baby." Maxime turned, offended. "I am not hurting him. I am improving him." The machine lowered. A needle entered Gru Jr.'s arm. The baby screamed. Maxime's serum moved through his body like black fire. Tiny antennae pushed through his hair. His fingers hardened into claws. A dark shell formed across his back. Gru Jr.'s cries became sharper, stranger, until the restraints snapped beneath his sudden strength. Maxime laughed with tears in his eyes. "Behold, Gru's own son, reborn in my image." The laboratory doors exploded inward. Gru stepped through the flames. Lucy moved beside him. Poppy and the girls spread across the upper walkway. Lenny growled, fur raised. For one breath, nobody moved. Then Gru saw his son. The small creature crouched beside Maxime still wore Gru Jr.'s clothes, but wings trembled beneath the fabric. Black veins crossed his cheeks. His eyes glowed red. Gru's weapon lowered. No, Maxime lifted the transformed baby like a trophy. Do you see? He belongs to me now. Gru fired. The blast struck Maxime's shoulder and sent him crashing across the platform. Valentina attacked Lucy. Cockroaches flooded from hidden compartments. Alarms screamed. The girls released Lenny, who tore through the swarm with snapping jaws. Poppy hacked the security system while Edith swung from a cable, kicking a guard into a chemical tank. Gru ran toward his son. Gru Jr. turned and attacked him. A tiny claw struck Gru's face with enough force to throw him through a glass wall. He hit the floor, breath gone, blood filling his mouth. The baby landed nearby, wings buzzing, teeth bared. Gru refused to raise his weapon. "It's me," he whispered. "It's Dad." Gru Jr. charged again. Above them, the mountain trembled as the mega minions arrived with all the grace of a meteor strike. Rocks split. Machinery collapsed. One of Maxime's power cores cracked open, spilling energy through the laboratory. A countdown appeared across every screen. 60 seconds until detonation. Maxime seized Gru Jr. and launched himself toward an escape shaft. Gru staggered upright and chased them as the floor broke apart beneath his feet. Ahead, Maxime reached the edge of the tower. Behind, the entire mountain began to explode. And between them, Gru Jr. turned his glowing eyes toward his father, without a single sign that he remembered him. The tower split down the middle. Gru leaped across the widening gap as fire climbed through the metal supports. Below him, the laboratory collapsed in waves, platforms folding, glass tanks bursting, cockroaches scattering through orange smoke. Maxime rose into the escape shaft with Gru Jr. locked against his chest. Gru fired his grappling hook. The cable wrapped around Maxime's ankle. For one violent second, all three hung above the burning mountain. Maxime beat his wings, dragging Gru higher while the cable cut into Gru's gloves. Gru Jr. twisted in Maxime's grip, red eyes fixed on his father. Nothing, no recognition, no warmth. Maxime laughed. "He does not know you anymore." Gru's arm trembled. The explosion below sent heat rushing past his face, but he held on. "He knows me. Then call him." Gru opened his mouth. The words would not come. What could he say? That he was sorry for failing? That he should have protected him? That he had spent months begging for one smile, then nearly lost everything the moment he finally heard the word Dad? Maxime pulled harder. The glove began to tear. Gru stopped fighting the cable and looked only at his son. "Junior," he whispered, "you can bite me later." The baby's antennae twitched. Gru swallowed. "You can kick me, pull my nose, throw food at my head. You can hate every bedtime song I sing." A metal beam collapsed beside them. Gru did not look away. "But I am still your dad." Gru Jr. blinked. Maxime's smile vanished. The baby's red eyes flickered. For an instant, the monster disappeared, and beneath it was the same stubborn little boy who had turned every morning into war. "Da," he said. Then he bit Maxime's hand. Maxime screamed and released him. Gru let go of the cable. He fell. Wind tore the breath from his lungs as he dropped toward the fire, arms reaching. Gru Jr. tumbled above him, wings beating wildly but without control. Gru twisted in the air and caught him against his chest. The baby clawed at Gru's jacket. Gru held tighter. "I have you." The tower vanished beneath them. Then a yellow blur slammed into their bodies. The flying mega minion caught them seconds before impact and shot sideways through a wall. They crashed across a rocky slope, rolled through ash, and stopped beneath a shower of broken machinery. Gru opened his eyes. Gru Jr. sat on his chest, still transformed, still covered in dark shell, but smiling. Gru laughed once, breathless and broken, then pulled him close. Above them, Maxime escaped the tower and dove straight toward Gru. His wings were burning. Half his armor had cracked away. Rage had swallowed everything human in his face. "You ruined my life!" Gru pushed the baby behind him and raised his weapon. Before he could fire, the strongest mega minion punched Maxime out of the sky. Maxime flew through 3 trees, bounced across the ground, and landed inside Lenny's transport cage. The honey badger looked at him. Maxime looked back. The cage exploded with screaming. Valentina tried to flee in Maxime's aircraft, but Lucy swung onto the wing using a loose cable. Poppy locked the controls from her tablet. The aircraft spun, clipped the mountain, and landed nose first in a lake. Valentina crawled out soaked, furious, and immediately found herself surrounded by anti-Villain League agents. Silas arrived moments later, staring at the destroyed mountain, the burning aircraft, and 5 mega-minions attempting to high-five without demolishing anything else. They demolished the aircraft. Silas sighed. By sunrise, Maxime was back in restraints. This time, sealed inside reinforced armor, surrounded by guards, and watched by Lenny, who refused to leave the cage door. Maxime shouted threats as agents carried him away. Gru barely heard them. Scientists examined Gru Jr. beside the ruined laboratory. The transformation was unstable. The serum could be reversed, but not immediately. Until then, his claws, wings, and strength would remain. Lucy squeezed Gru's hand. "He remembers you." Gru looked down at his son. Gru Jr. smiled sweetly. Then he punched Gru through a medical tent. Later, as the family stood together beneath the pale morning sky, Silas delivered the news. Maxime was captured. Their identities were secure. They could return home. Everyone cheered. Everyone except Margo. She looked toward Mayflower, toward the life they had abandoned, and quietly asked the question no one was ready to answer. What happens to Poppy? Poppy stood alone beside the road as anti-Villain League vehicles prepared to leave. Her arms were crossed, her chin raised, but the mask was slipping. Gru had seen that look before. The stubborn face of someone pretending goodbye did not hurt. "You completed your first villainous mission," Gru said. Poppy gave a small shrug. "I stole a honey badger and helped destroy a mountain." "Excellent beginner work." She almost smiled. Then Gru handed her a black envelope stamped with the emblem of Lycée Pa Bon. Principal Ubelschlecht had been furious about Lenny's theft, the ruined school, and Maxime's capture. But she had also been impressed. Poppy had bypassed security, controlled a dangerous animal, and survived Gru's leadership. By the school's twisted standards, she was perfect. Poppy opened the envelope. Her eyes widened. "Accepted?" Gru nodded. "On probation, which means they expect you to fail." "Good. Also, Lenny must be returned." A growl came from behind her. The honey badger had wrapped himself around Poppy's leg. Gru slowly stepped backward. "You may handle that part." Before leaving, Poppy hugged him. It happened so quickly that Gru froze with his arms in the air. Then she released him, adjusted her jacket, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Gru watched her go, a quiet warmth settling beneath the bruises. He had not only helped create another villain, he had helped a lonely child find somewhere to belong. The Cunningham family disappeared that morning. Days later, Gru, Lucy, Margo, Edith, Agnes, and Gru Jr. returned to their real home. The front wall had been rebuilt. The windows were new. The minions had decorated everything with balloons, banners, and an enormous cake shaped like Gru's head. One minion leaped from the roof wearing angel wings. Another fired confetti directly into Silas Ramsbottom's face. Home. The word felt different now. Margo ran upstairs and opened the box containing her old photographs. Edith recovered weapons hidden beneath her bed. Agnes raced into the yard where her goat waited beside a fence, chewing through an anti-Villain League warning sign. Agnes dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around him, laughing through tears. Lucy stood in the doorway, watching Gru hold their son. The antidote worked slowly. Gru Jr.'s claws softened. The shell across his back faded. His wings shrank until only 2 tiny bumps remained beneath his clothes. But one thing did not change. He still enjoyed hurting Gru. The baby smiled, grabbed his father's scarf, and pulled with surprising strength. Gru gasped. "The serum is clearly still active." Lucy laughed. "No, that's just your son." That evening, Gru visited Maxime in prison. The former cockroach king sat inside a reinforced cell, wings bound, arms crossed, dignity shattered. Gru stood outside the bars holding a small music player. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Maxime finally sneered. "Have you come to enjoy my humiliation?" Gru pressed a button. Music filled the corridor, an old song, the same song from their school talent show. Maxime stared at him. Gru began singing. Badly, very badly. The guards exchanged nervous glances. Prisoners shouted for him to stop. Maxime's face twisted with rage, then confusion, and finally something unexpected. He laughed. At first it was bitter, then louder. Gru kept singing, adding the dance moves they had once fought over as children. Maxime rose. Slowly he joined in. Across the prison, villains appeared at their cell doors. Some laughed, some sang. Others began dancing with whatever movement their restraints allowed. The corridor that had once echoed with threats now shook with music. Outside, Lucy waited with the girls and the minions. Gru stepped through the gates just as the sun lowered behind the city. Gru Jr. reached toward him from Lucy's arms. "Da!" Gru's face softened. He took his son, expecting a hug. Instead, Gru Jr. slapped him across the cheek. The girls burst into laughter. Lucy kissed Gru's bruised face. Minions poured around them, singing, shouting, and tripping over one another as the family walked home. Gru had spent half his life trying to become the greatest villain in the world. He had stolen monuments, built armies, and terrified entire cities. But his greatest victory was smaller. A wife holding his hand, 3 daughters beside him, a baby pulling his nose, and a home loud enough to remind him that he would never be alone again. Returning to Despicable Me after more than a decade, Chris Renaud faced a deceptively difficult assignment. He wasn't simply directing another animated sequel. He was stepping back into a world he helped create, populated by characters who had become global icons, internet memes, and theme park royalty. Renaud had co-directed the first 2 films before guiding the Lorax and both Secret Life of Pets movies, while remaining connected to the franchise as a producer. Despicable Me 4 therefore feels less like a hired filmmaker taking control, and more like one of the original architects walking back into a building that has expanded far beyond his first blueprint. That return carried nostalgia, but also pressure. Renaud had spent roughly 16 years working with Illumination, watching the studio grow from a comparatively small Paris-based operation into an animation powerhouse. He openly acknowledged the danger of sequel filmmaking. One weak continuation can alter how audiences remember the films that came before it. His philosophy was simple: don't drop the ball. That may not sound revolutionary, but it explains the movie's creative temperament. Despicable Me 4 doesn't attempt to dismantle the franchise or transform it into prestige animation. It protects the familiar rhythm: family warmth, villainous theatrics, frantic slapstick, and minion chaos delivered with almost mechanical confidence. Renaud's central idea was surprisingly ordinary: moving house. Gru may possess futuristic weapons, secret tunnels, and an army of yellow assistants, but the emotional foundation came from the director's own experience of relocating when he was 15. He remembered it as life-altering: the sudden loss of familiar surroundings, the discomfort of entering a community where nobody knows you. That memory became the starting point for Gru's family entering a witness protection-style existence in Mayflower. Strip away the gadgets and supervillains, and the situation is painfully recognizable. New home, new neighbors, new identities. Everyone pretending they are adjusting better than they actually are. That emotional simplicity gives the madness something solid to bounce against. The film also reflects Renaud's instincts as a parent. Gru's greatest challenge is no longer proving that he can love his adopted daughters. The earlier movies already settled that. Now he must survive a baby who appears determined to reject him. Gru Jr. turns fatherhood into physical comedy, but underneath the gag sits a familiar parental anxiety. What happens when your child doesn't respond to you the way you imagined? Renaud and several members of the creative team drew from their experiences raising children, searching for family problems that could be exaggerated without losing their emotional truth. The resulting movie treats domestic frustration and supervillain danger as equally legitimate emergencies. Here's where Renaud's approach becomes clever. The family is placed inside an intentionally grounded suburban environment, far removed from the exaggerated spectacle of stealing the moon. Gru's sharp silhouette, European-influenced house, and theatrical machinery suddenly collide with polished lawns, country club manners, and aggressively normal neighbors. That visual clash is the joke before anyone speaks. Renaud described the challenge as bridging the franchise's graphic design language with a more recognizable world. Mayflower cannot become completely realistic because Gru would look as though he had wandered into the wrong film. Instead, normality is stretched just enough to accommodate him. Clean, wealthy, and faintly artificial, like suburbia designed by someone who distrusts suburbia. Patrick Deledge, making his feature co-directing debut, helped Renaud manage that balance. while producers Chris Meledandri and Brett Hoffman provided the familiar illumination infrastructure. The collaboration benefited from technology that had changed enormously since the original film. During the first Despicable Me, Renaud's team worried about technical obstacles as basic as whether Gru's scarf could be animated properly. By the fourth movie, those pipeline anxieties had largely disappeared. The conversations could focus on taste. Is the shot funny? Is the design readable? Does the sequence deserve to exist? Better tools did not automatically create better comedy, but they gave the filmmakers more freedom to fail, revise, and chase stronger ideas. The Mega Minions show that revision process in action. Early versions reportedly placed the Minions around Mayflower, enjoying yachts and even spending time in Las Vegas. Colorful? Certainly. Funny enough? Apparently not. The filmmakers shifted them into the anti-villain league and revived a super-powered minion concept first considered during Despicable Me 2. Renaud favored powers that could be understood instantly: stretching, flight, laser vision, and rock-like strength. The Fantastic Four became a visual reference because their abilities are bold, slightly absurd, and readable in a fraction of a second. It is franchise engineering at its most efficient. Take familiar minion incompetence, combine it with superhero imagery, then let enormous power amplify tiny mistakes. Renaud has compared Gru's continuing adventures to James Bond, where each installment can introduce a new villain and a new situation without rebuilding the hero from scratch. He has also invoked The Simpsons, whose characters remain recognizable while the world keeps generating fresh trouble around them. That is the governing vision of Despicable Me 4. Preserve the emotional arrangement, change the pressure surrounding it. Gru remains Gru. The minions remain walking accidents. The family remains the franchise's heart. But vision only establishes the destination. The real question is how writers Mike White and Ken Daurio constructed enough intersecting stories to get everyone there, and whether that crowded blueprint could hold together. A fourth Despicable Me story begins with a problem the original film never had. Gru is no longer allowed to change very much. His transformation from selfish supervillain to devoted father was the emotional engine of the first movie. Reverse that growth and audiences feel cheated. Repeat it, and the sequel feels empty. Screenwriters Mike White and Ken Daurio therefore attack Gru from the outside. They don't ask whether he can love his family. They ask whether he can protect that family while being stripped of the identity, home, and reputation that once made him powerful. Witness protection becomes more than a plot device. It turns Gru, the man who once tried to steal the moon, into a suburban nobody struggling to operate a vending machine. The writing partnership itself combines two very different creative energies. Daurio had written every main Despicable Me film, giving him an intimate understanding of the franchise's elastic logic and emotional boundaries. White arrived with a resume that included School of Rock and The White Lotus, stories built around social discomfort, class tension, and characters exposing themselves through awkward behavior. Illumination's official credits identify White as the Emmy-winning creator of The White Lotus and Daurio as the franchise veteran. You can feel that contrast in Mayflower. Familiar slapstick sits beside a sharper comedy of wealthy neighbors, country club performance, and Gru desperately pretending to belong. The script's cleanest structural decision is forcing the family to move. Maxime Le Mal's escape creates the danger, but relocation creates the comedy. Gru becomes Chet Cunningham, Lucy becomes Blanche, and the children are expected to abandon the only lives they understand. Every family member receives a variation of the same conflict. How do you behave naturally while performing a lie? Gru cannot suppress his controlling instincts. Lucy's attempt to work in a salon becomes a disaster. Margo enters a socially hostile environment, while Agnes cannot even accept lying about her name. The screenplay takes one broad premise and fractures it into several age-specific anxieties. That is efficient family storytelling, even when the film races through those anxieties faster than they deserve. Then comes Poppy Prescott, the script's most useful new character, because she reconnects Gru with the criminal identity he is being ordered to hide. She recognizes him immediately and blackmails him into stealing Lycée Pa Bon's honey badger mascot. On the surface, This is a detachable comic adventure. Structurally, it performs three jobs at once. It places Gru's cover in danger, gives Poppy a reason to enter the family's orbit, and restores the heist mechanics that defined the original movie. Most importantly, Gru becomes a reluctant mentor to a child dreaming of villainy. The reverse image of the first film, where three children unknowingly taught a villain how to become a father. The high school history with Maxime follows the same backward-looking design. Rather than inventing an entirely unrelated enemy, the writers create someone who remembers Gru before his redemption. Maxime's grievance is hilariously petty. He believes Gru stole his talent show idea. Petty motives suit this universe better than apocalyptic ones. The feud makes villainy feel like wounded ego with expensive equipment, which has always been the franchise's comic sweet spot. Maxime threatens Gru Jr., raising the stakes without turning the movie emotionally grim. He is dangerous enough to move the plot, ridiculous enough to remain inside Illumination's playful tone, and personally connected enough to make the conflict belong to Gru rather than the anti-villain league. But here's the catch. The screenplay is carrying too much luggage. Alongside Maxime's revenge and the witness protection story, it must accommodate Gru Jr.'s rejection of his father, Poppy's villain school ambition, Margot's social discomfort, Lucy's workplace disaster, Agnes losing her beloved goat, and 5 minions receiving superpowers. The 94-minute film often behaves like a collection of linked animated shorts. Scenes arrive, deliver a concentrated joke, and disappear before their emotional consequences can settle. That speed is part of the franchise's appeal. Children rarely have time to become restless, but it weakens the central pursuit. Maxime vanishes for stretches, so the movie can service everyone else. The Mega Minions expose both the strength and weakness of that construction. The concept originated as an unused idea during Despicable Me 2 before being revived here, with powers designed for immediate visual comprehension: flight, stretching, laser vision, and rock-like strength. As comedy, it works because the joke requires no explanation. Give incompetent creatures superhero abilities, and wait for public property to collapse. As narrative, however, the thread remains largely separate until the climax. The Mega Minions function less like essential participants than a parallel attraction, an energetic mini-movie inserted because the filmmakers knew the audience expected minion escalation. Still, White and Daurio understand the emotional destination. The climax does not depend on Gru inventing a stronger weapon. He saves Gru Jr. by speaking to him as a father, breaking Maxime's control through affection rather than villainous skill. The screenplay circles back to its simplest concern. Gru fears his son does not love him, and the danger forces that bond into the open. Messy? Absolutely. Efficient? Not always. Yet beneath the subplot sits a sturdy idea about identity. The names and homes can change, but the family cannot. Putting those words on the page was only half the battle, though. Their comedy depended on finding voices capable of making grotesque villains, anxious children, and babbling yellow agents feel as if they naturally occupied the same world. The casting of Despicable Me 4 begins with a truth Illumination could never escape. Gru's face belongs to the animators, but his identity belongs to Steve Carell. That peculiar accent, part Eastern European caricature, part theatrical invention, has survived 4 main films because Carell plays it with total sincerity. Recasting him would not merely change the sound of Gru, it would disturb the emotional continuity of the entire franchise. Renaud describes Carell as unusually thoughtful about the character, arriving at recording sessions with specific ideas about Gru's motives and behavior. Beneath all the vocal distortion, he is still protecting the psychology of a father. The returning ensemble was selected less for novelty than for stability. Kristen Wiig resumes Lucy's breathless enthusiasm, Miranda Cosgrove returns as Margo, Dana Gayer continues as Edith, and Steve Coogan again voices Anti-Villain League chief Silas Ramsbottom. Cosgrove had been playing Margo since she was 13 and was 30 by the 4th film's release. A remarkable stretch for a character who has barely aged on screen. That history matters. Even when Margo receives limited material, Cosgrove's voice carries memories of the cautious child who first distrusted Gru. Wiig provides a different kind of continuity, elastic comic energy that prevents Lucy's domestic role from turning her into a conventional animated mother. Agnes required the franchise's biggest continuity adjustment. Madison Poland became the third performer to voice Gru's youngest daughter, following Elsie Fisher and Neve Scherel. This was reportedly Poland's first film or television role, placing an inexperienced performer beside some of American comedy's most recognizable voices. Yet the choice protects what matters about Agnes: openness. The character cannot sound polished or self-aware. Her humor comes from believing every hopeful thought completely, whether she is defending honesty or emotionally attaching herself to an animal within seconds. Casting a young newcomer preserves that innocence rather than asking an adult performer to manufacture an approximation of childhood. The boldest addition was Will Ferrell as Maxime Le Mal. Ferrell admitted during the promotional tour that he had not watched the previous films and did not even know who Gru was before joining, but playing a French villain appealed to him as a bucket list opportunity. Oddly, that distance may have helped. Maxime does not sound like someone carefully adapting himself to Gru's universe. He arrives at full volume, luxuriating in every syllable as though his accent deserves its own spotlight. Ferrell's comedy has always thrived on unjustified confidence, from Ron Burgundy to Mugatu. Maxime is built from the same fuel, vanity so intense that humiliation only makes him louder. Renaud understood that Carell and Ferrell needed to sound connected, even though animated voice actors commonly record separately. He praised Ferrell's commitment and said the two performances feel as though they occupy the same room, despite being captured apart. That invisible chemistry comes from contrast. Carell's Gru speaks through clenched frustration, compressing emotion until it leaks out as irritation. Ferrell stretches everything: vowels, laughter, outrage, until Maxime seems to inflate around his own ego. One voice pulls inward, the other explodes outward. Put them together, and the rivalry becomes audible before the characters begin trading insults. Sofia Vergara was an equally natural choice for Valentina, Maxime's glamorous partner. Her casting allows the film to communicate the character instantly: confidence, sharp comic timing, and a voice capable of cutting through Maxime's theatrical noise. Valentina is not written with the same depth as the central villain, yet Vergara prevents her from becoming background decoration. Joey King receives richer material as Poppy Prescott, the aspiring criminal who blackmails Gru. King described Poppy as casually sinister, which captures the performance perfectly. She avoids sounding openly monstrous. Instead, threats emerge with the relaxed certainty of a teenager discussing weekend plans. That calmness makes Poppy funnier and stranger than another shrieking child villain would have been. Stephen Colbert and Chloe Fineman complete the Prescott family as Perry and Patsy. Their casting draws on two performers skilled at identifying social types quickly. Colbert gives Perry the smooth contempt of a wealthy suburban man who believes friendliness is something less successful people perform. Fineman, famous for vocal impressions, reportedly experimented with several inspirations before settling on Patsy's southern-flavored sound. The actors recorded separately and had not built a traditional screen partnership, yet that slight disconnection suits the Prescotts. They feel less like an intimate couple than two polished personalities sharing the same expensive home while their daughter secretly plans crimes upstairs. And then there is Pierre Coffin, the franchise's least replaceable performer after Carell. He again supplies the minions' squeaks, arguments, and multilingual nonsense, turning gibberish into readable emotion through rhythm alone. Illumination's casting strategy ultimately mixes permanence with disruption. Familiar voices secure the family, while Ferrell, Vergara, King, Colbert, and Fineman expand the comic temperature around them. On paper, that is an impressive ensemble, but famous names are only promises. The real test lies inside the performances: how Carell makes Gru's absurd accent emotionally flexible, how Ferrell weaponizes theatrical vanity, and how the cast creates relationships while standing alone behind microphones. Steve Carell's most revealing moment in Despicable Me 4 is not a joke, an action sequence, or one of Gru's grand declarations. It is the wounded confusion that enters his voice whenever Gru Jr. rejects him. Carell has spent the franchise turning an exaggerated accent into a surprisingly flexible instrument, but the baby gives him a new emotional note to play: insecurity. Gru has already learned how to love his daughters. Now he meets a child who does not immediately return that affection, and Carell lets the character's confidence shrink. The pauses grow longer. The complaints become softer. Gru suddenly sounds less like a former supervillain and more like an exhausted father wondering what he is doing wrong. Carell has said that he connects with Gru because the character's central concern is being a good father. That identification becomes the foundation of this performance rather than a sentimental decoration added afterward. Listen to how he separates Gru's public and private voices. Around the Anti-Villain League, Gru speaks with clipped authority, forcing every word outward as though he is still commanding an underground army. Around Gru Jr., the same voice loosens. He pleads, negotiates, and occasionally descends into childish frustration. The accent remains absurd, but the feeling underneath it is recognizable. That is Carell's trick. He never asks the audience to choose between caricature and sincerity. He plays both at once. The tennis sequence captures that balance beautifully. Gru wants to impress his wealthy neighbor, survive an unfamiliar social ritual, and preserve his fake identity, all while remaining fundamentally incapable of behaving casually. Carell attacks ordinary conversation as though it were a hostage negotiation. Every attempt at confidence carries a trace of panic. This is where his years playing socially desperate characters become useful. Gru does not merely want to win the game. He wants the people around him to accept the version of himself he has invented. The harder he performs normality, the stranger he sounds. Carell makes embarrassment audible before the animation delivers the physical punchline. Will Ferrell works at the opposite end of the scale. Maxime Le Mal has no private voice. Everything is performance. Ferrell reportedly approached him through an intentionally oversized French accent, matching a character built around theatrical vanity and old resentment. He stretches names, savors insults, and laughs as though applause should follow every breath. It would be easy for that approach to become shapeless noise, but Ferrell gives Maxime a clear comic rhythm. Confidence first, wounded ego second, furious escalation last. Even his transformation into a cockroach-enhanced villain feels less like science and more like a celebrity unveiling a new costume. Carell and Ferrell are especially effective because their voices move in opposite directions. Gru compresses emotion. Maxime expands it until the room can barely contain him. When they confront one another at Lycée Pas Bon, the rivalry sounds decades old even before the film explains the talent show grievance. Gru's disgust is dry and defensive. Maxime treats every memory as an operatic betrayal. The performers had previously appeared together in live-action comedies, but animation removes their physical chemistry and forces them to rebuild conflict through timing alone. The result is not intimate, exactly. It is competitive. Two comic styles trying to dominate the same exchange. Ferrell's weakness is partly the screenplays. Maxime disappears for long stretches, so the performance cannot develop much beyond flamboyant menace. The cockroach obsession is visually rich, yet vocally he is rarely permitted to reveal anything beneath vanity. Still, Ferrell understands that psychological depth is not the assignment. Maxime belongs to the tradition of Despicable Me villains whose emotional damage becomes branding. Vector's technological arrogance, El Macho's masculine spectacle, Balthazar Bratt's devotion to the 1980s. Ferrell commits to the ridiculousness without winking at it. Maxime truly believes becoming part cockroach makes him magnificent. That conviction sells the joke. Pierre Coffin faces an even stranger acting challenge. He voices the Minions, characters whose dialogue mixes invented sounds with fragments of recognizable languages. Yet viewers must understand fear, pride, jealousy, and confusion immediately. Coffin achieves that through pitch and tempo rather than vocabulary. A rising squeal becomes panic. A low mutter becomes suspicion. Rapid, overlapping chatter creates the feeling of a workplace argument, even when almost none of the words carry literal meaning. He has returned as their signature voice throughout the franchise, and Despicable Me 4 asks him to distinguish ordinary minion foolishness from the inflated confidence of the Mega Minions. That confidence is the comic center of their performance. The Mega Minions behave like superheroes who have studied triumphant poses, but skipped every lesson about responsibility. Coffin gives them vocal swagger seconds before catastrophe, allowing the audience to hear the failure coming. Carell provides the film's emotional spine, Ferrell supplies theatrical opposition, and Coffin keeps detonating the tone whenever it becomes too orderly. Yet those three voices do not operate alone. Their strongest moments depend on the performers surrounding them, especially Kristen Wiig's controlled chaos, Joey King's deadpan menace, and the returning daughters who remind Gru what all this frantic protection is actually for. Kristen Wiig's Lucy has one of the film's hardest jobs because she must create momentum inside scenes that barely affect the central conflict. Her supermarket and salon misadventures could have felt like disposable detours, yet Wiig attacks them with the breathless commitment that has defined Lucy since Despicable Me 2. She pitches the character slightly higher than ordinary conversation, giving every sentence the energy of someone improvising confidence a second before disaster. Lucy does not enter witness protection quietly. She tries to perform normality with such aggressive enthusiasm that normality becomes impossible. Wiig turns social panic into acceleration. The faster Lucy speaks, the less control she clearly has. Motherhood adds a useful pressure beneath that comedy. Wiig said her own experience helped her appreciate Lucy's attempt to balance work and parenting, a tension exaggerated by the family's sudden relocation and fabricated identities. Lucy is technically an accomplished anti-villain league agent, but the film places her in situations where professional skill offers no advantage. Espionage training cannot prepare her for salon small talk or a customer who hates her haircut. That reversal protects Lucy from becoming merely Gru's sensible wife. Gru may drive the main plot, but Lucy receives her own form of humiliation, and Wiig plays it without vanity. She lets the character look frantic, foolish, and completely sincere. Joey King makes the strongest impression among the newcomers because she understands that Poppy Prescott becomes funnier when she barely raises her voice. Poppy idolizes Gru's criminal past, blackmails him, and recruits him into a school heist. Yet King avoids the obvious choice of playing her as a miniature supervillain shouting every threat. Her delivery is cool, clipped, and almost bored. Danger arrives disguised as teenage detachment. The official cast materials position Poppy among the major new characters, but King's performance does more than introduce another face. It gives Gru an admirer who values precisely the identity he is trying to suppress. That makes the Gru-Poppy pairing the ensemble's most interesting relationship outside the immediate family. Carell fills Gru's voice with suspicion and parental exasperation, while King responds as though every objection is an administrative inconvenience. Their age difference creates the expected mentor-student comedy, but their moral positions make it stranger. Gru, the former villain, argues for restraint. Poppy, the suburban teenager, demands criminal ambition. King never treats her admiration as cute play acting. Poppy believes villainy is a legitimate career path, complete with educational requirements and professional heroes. The seriousness of that belief gives the Lycée heist its comic pulse. Miranda Cosgrove, Dana Gayer, and Madison Poland provide a quieter form of support as Margo, Edith, and Agnes. The daughters were once the franchise's central transformative force. Here, they are more often reminders of what Gru has already become. Cosgrove gives Margo's discomfort a restrained adolescent quality, especially when the new neighborhood forces her into unfamiliar social hierarchies. Gayer's Edith retains her rougher, more mischievous edge, although the screenplay gives her little room to develop. Poland, joining the series as Agnes, inherits the character's defining sincerity. The returning and new cast credits place all three within the family ensemble, but their uneven screen time exposes how crowded the sequel has become. Agnes nevertheless receives one of the movie's clearest emotional ideas. She struggles with lying about her identity because honesty is not an abstract rule to her. It is part of how she understands goodness. Poland delivers that conflict without forcing sentimentality. Her small, uncertain pauses create more feeling than a dramatic speech would have done. The goat subplot is broad and undeniably engineered for younger viewers, Yet Agnes's instant attachment also reflects the family's larger anxiety. Everyone has lost something familiar. Gru loses his authority, Lucy loses her professional footing, Margo loses her social environment, and Agnes pours that displacement into an animal she can protect. Sofia Vergara's Valentina occupies the opposite end of the vocal spectrum. She gives Maxime's partner glamour, impatience, and enough sharpness to avoid disappearing behind Will Ferrell's enormous performance. Illumination presents Valentina as Maxime's femme fatale girlfriend, and that description also reveals the limitation. The character functions more as an extension of his image than as an independently motivated villain. Vergara still finds comic value in reaction. When Maxime swells with pride, Valentina's tone can puncture him without openly challenging his authority. She sounds like the one person who knows how ridiculous he is, and has decided the lifestyle remains worth it. Stephen Colbert and Chloe Fineman turn the Prescotts into suburban satire through vocal texture. Colbert's Perry speaks with smooth, effortless superiority, making casual conversation feel like an evaluation Gru has already failed. Fineman's Patsy is warmer, but no less performative, wrapped in a carefully chosen Southern-style accent. The actors recorded separately and reportedly met in person only after voicing the married couple, an amusing fact that fits their screen relationship. Perry and Patsy resemble coordinated social brands more than deeply connected partners. Their polished friendliness gives Mayflower its faintly hostile atmosphere. Steve Coogan's Silas Ramsbottom then provides institutional deadpan, treating Mega Minion Catastrophe with the exhausted authority of a manager who has seen too much. Around him, these supporting voices create distinct comic territories: domestic panic, teenage menace, suburban snobbery, romantic vanity, and bureaucratic fatigue. The ensemble is not perfectly balanced. Several characters receive only enough time to establish a joke before the film rushes elsewhere. Still, each voice makes its corner immediately recognizable. And those corners matter because the next layer of storytelling is physical. Homes, costumes, laboratories, and villain schools designed to express character before a single performer opens their mouth. The safest house in Mayflower looks like the worst possible place to hide Gru. Everything around him is bright, manicured, and aggressively respectable. Trimmed lawns, broad windows, pastel surfaces, and neighbors who treat leisure as a competitive sport. Gru's original home expressed his personality through pointed architecture, dark interiors, and machinery buried beneath domestic space. The Mayflower house does the opposite. It exposes him. There are fewer shadows, fewer secret mechanisms, and almost no visual protection from the community outside. Production design turns witness protection into an identity crisis before the dialogue explains it. Gru has not simply lost his name. He has been dropped into an environment that rejects his silhouette. That contrast was shaped under art directors Olivier Adam and Charlotte Hutchinson, with Eric Gliong, Carter Goodrich, and Philippe Talicti credited as character designers. The scale of the art department matters because animated production design is not merely choosing attractive backgrounds. Every room, appliance, costume, and decorative object must be designed, modeled, surfaced, and lit before it can exist. Set designer Edine Noel described producing complete drawing packages and Maya-based 3D mock-ups under Adam's supervision, refining sets down to small environmental details. Nothing is accidentally sitting in the corner. Even clutter has passed through a pipeline. The most revealing design work may be the evolution of Gru's original house. Visual development artist Gregory Georges spent 2 years on the film, from 2020 to 2022, creating color studies and mood explorations for major sets, props, and characters. He also produced paint-overs, imagining how Gru's home would have changed after years of family life. That idea is quietly important. The house once belonged to a lonely villain whose furniture seemed selected to intimidate visitors. Family life has softened it without erasing its owner. Warmth enters the palette. Toys interrupt the geometry. Domestic objects compete with criminal technology. Gru's emotional development is embedded in the walls. Mayflower, by comparison, is designed around smooth social performance. The Prescott home is larger, cleaner, and more fashionable than the safe house, communicating Perry's status before Stephen Colbert gives him a voice. Its spaces feel curated rather than inhabited. That suits a family whose friendliness carries the texture of an interview. The country club extends the same design language: open greenery, coordinated clothing, and polished recreational spaces where Gru's awkward body appears almost confrontational. Put his long nose, narrow legs, and barrel-shaped torso beside athletic suburban figures, and he becomes a visual disturbance. The environment is normal only by its own artificial standards. Laissez pas bon pushes in the opposite direction. Where Mayflower hides hostility beneath cleanliness, the villain school announces danger through Gothic scale, stone textures, and ceremonial spaces. It resembles an elite European institution redesigned by criminals with excellent taste and no interest in child safety. Tall interiors make students appear small. Dramatic staircases turn movement into entrance. Trophies and traditions suggest that villainy has its own aristocracy. Poppy's dream of attending suddenly makes sense. The school does not present evil as chaotic behavior. It sells evil as heritage, discipline, and prestige, the criminal equivalent of an exclusive academy whose alumni never stop mentioning where they studied. Maxime Le Mal's design follows the same principle of personality made physical. His narrow features, elevated hairstyle, sharp clothing, and cockroach-inspired technology all point upward or outward, enlarging a man who already considers himself magnificent. Valentina's sleek wardrobe complements him without copying him. Together, they look less like fugitives than performers who expect photographers at every crime scene. Gru's familiar scarf and dark clothing, meanwhile, remain essential pieces of visual shorthand. Renaud recalled that the first film's team once questioned whether Gru's scarf was technically practical to animate. By the fourth movie, advances in rendering and simulation had moved such discussions away from basic feasibility and toward creative choice. The Mega Minions represent the character design team's smartest act of controlled mutation. Their powers do not fight the original minion shapes. They exaggerate them. Tall Tim becomes elastic. One-eyed Mel gains a laser that extends the logic of his goggle. Another minion becomes a dense rock figure, while the flying member turns into a human, or rather minion, projectile. Renaud said the team deliberately favored simple, graphic powers that could be understood immediately, drawing inspiration from the slightly goofy visual clarity of the Fantastic Four. That clarity is crucial. A complicated superhero design would bury the joke. These creatures must remain recognizable even while crashing through buildings. Not every location receives equal attention. The film moves so quickly that Maxime's vessel, the Anti-Villain League facilities, and several neighborhood spaces sometimes function as gag platforms rather than fully explored worlds. Yet the overall design remains disciplined. Rounded minions collide with sharp machinery. Gru's dark European eccentricity collides with American suburban polish. Villain school grandeur collides with Poppy's small frame. Shape, color, and scale keep expressing relationships the screenplay barely has time to articulate. But design creates only the stage. The next question is how virtual lenses, lighting, and camera movement transform those constructed spaces into kinetic comedy. The most technically revealing image in Despicable Me 4 may be Gru attempting to play tennis. Nothing explodes. No vehicle tears through a building. Yet the sequence explains the film's visual language in miniature. Gru's body is framed against the clean geometry of the country club, where every line suggests elegance and control. Then he moves. His heavy torso rotates too far, his thin legs scramble underneath him, and the camera gives each physical mistake enough space to register. The comedy does not come from visual clutter. It comes from placing an impossible body inside an orderly frame and allowing movement to destroy the illusion of normality. Animation gives filmmakers total control over the camera, but that freedom can become a trap. A virtual lens can fly anywhere, pass through walls, and ignore gravity. So movement quickly loses impact when every shot behaves like a theme park ride. Renaud and co-director Patrick Deledge mostly resist that temptation. Domestic scenes are staged with relatively stable framing, allowing the characters' poses and expressions to carry the joke. The camera becomes more aggressive when danger arrives. Maxime's attacks, the Lycée robbery, and the Mega Minion disasters introduce wider angles, sudden accelerations, and exaggerated depth. Restraint makes the bursts of motion feel larger. The franchise's graphic character design also determines how shots are composed. Gru is built from contradictions. A broad upper body balanced on tiny legs, a long pointed nose extending from a rounded skull. The minions are simpler still, bright yellow capsules with dark goggles and blue clothing. Renaud has connected their global readability to that simplicity, observing that they are easy to recognize and even easy for viewers to draw. The cinematography protects those silhouettes. Characters are frequently separated from backgrounds by color, brightness, or empty space, ensuring that a child can understand the action before processing the dialogue. Watch the mega minions in motion. Their powers are not photographed with the weight or solemnity of modern live-action superheroes. The camera treats them like silent comedy performers who happen to possess catastrophic abilities. A heroic low angle establishes confidence. The following shot destroys it. A flying minion launches with the grandeur of Superman, then becomes an uncontrolled object hurtling through public space. An elastic body stretches across the frame until composition itself becomes the joke. The setup looks monumental. The payoff looks stupid. That repeated visual reversal keeps the superhero parody readable without requiring detailed knowledge of the genre. Lighting performs quieter work. Mayflower is bright, polished, and evenly inviting, yet that cleanliness makes Gru more conspicuous. Lycée Pas Bon uses deeper shadows, directional light, and larger pools of darkness, giving the school theatrical menace without making it genuinely frightening. Maxime's cockroach technology introduces acidic greens and metallic highlights, while the minions retain their saturated yellow under almost every condition. This consistency is not accidental convenience. It is brand-level visual discipline. No matter how crowded a sequence becomes, the filmmakers preserve the colors audiences use to identify each comic faction. That polish grew from a production system far more capable than the one used on the original film. Illumination operates from Santa Monica, while its animation studio is based in Paris, continuing the transatlantic production model behind the franchise. Renaud recalled that the first Despicable Me team sometimes avoided elements such as water because of technical limitations, and even debated whether Gru's scarf would be too difficult to animate. By the fourth film, he said those conversations could focus on creative decisions rather than whether the technology could accomplish the idea at all. Freedom, in this case, means fewer invisible boundaries around the filmmaker's imagination. The technological evolution is visible in cloth, hair, crowds, reflective surfaces, and environmental destruction. But the film rarely waves those achievements in the audience's face. Earlier entries had already improved Illumination's rendering pipeline with global illumination, a process that simulates light bouncing between surfaces and helps caricatures sit naturally inside their environments. Despicable Me 4 benefits from years of refinement. Gru's scarf responds naturally. Soft light spreads through suburban interiors, and multiple characters can collide with complex sets without the image collapsing into digital confusion. The technique serves speed, not realism for its own sake. That speed is also the film's visual weakness. The camera is clear inside individual gags, but the editing moves between storylines so quickly that locations rarely build atmosphere. Shots establish the necessary information, land the joke, and exit. Lycée Pas Bon hints at a richer world than the film explores. Maxime's cockroach vessel appears designed for a larger adventure than it receives. Still, the craftsmanship remains precise. Every stretch, crash, and terrified reaction is timed for instant comprehension. And when the image moves this quickly, sound becomes its invisible partner, giving weight to impacts, personality to gibberish, and emotional direction to chaos before the audience has time to think. Before a mega minion crashes into anything, the soundtrack has already told us how to react. Heitor Pereira's music surges toward heroic grandeur. The sound effects give the character enough weight to resemble a genuine superhero, and then one badly timed movement punctures the fantasy. Impact, panic, gibberish. The joke is not created by animation alone. It is constructed through the collision of 3 sonic layers. Despicable Me 4 moves too quickly to explain every visual gag, so its audio performs emergency storytelling. Music identifies the mood, effects establish the physical consequence, and Pierre Coffin's minion voices deliver the emotional response, often within a few seconds. Pereira has scored every main Despicable Me installment and both Minions films, making him one of the franchise's most important sources of continuity. The fourth film's score album, released by Backlot Music on June 27, 2024, contains 44 tracks covering everything from the family's relocation to Maxime's cockroach army and the final confrontation. That history gives Pereira an advantage unavailable to a new composer. He does not need to discover the sound of Gru's world. He can bend an established musical vocabulary toward new situations, shifting between mischievous rhythm, mock espionage tension, exaggerated villainy, and surprisingly tender family material without making the movie sound fragmented. The Gru family music generally avoids overwhelming sentiment. Warmth appears through melody rather than enormous orchestral instruction, allowing scenes with Gru Jr. to remain comic even when the emotional concern is real. Gru's attempts to earn his son's affection need softness, but too much softness would announce the eventual reconciliation before the character has earned it. Pereira keeps the emotion mobile. A tender phrase may begin, only to be interrupted by a baby's expression, a mechanical accident, or Gru's wounded reaction. The score supports his insecurity without turning an irritated infant into a tragic figure. That tonal balance is harder than it sounds. One extra swell and the joke collapses. Maxime receives a different musical language, flamboyant menace with enough rhythmic exaggeration to expose his vanity. The music permits him to enter as though he is the greatest criminal mastermind alive, even when the imagery tells us he is a man emotionally trapped inside a school talent show grievance. That gap between how Maxime hears himself and how the audience sees him is delicious. Villain music normally generates fear. Here, it manufactures self-importance. The cockroach material adds sharper, more agitated textures. But the score never lets the film drift into horror. Maxime wants operatic terror. Pereira gives him something closer to a criminal fashion show. Ferrell Williams remains the other defining musical presence. His original song Double Life, written, performed, and produced for the film, directly echoes the story's obsession with secret identities. The title fits Gru, who must conceal his past while pretending to be Chet Cunningham, but it also describes the franchise itself. These movies constantly move between domestic comedy and criminal spectacle, asking Gru to be father and former villain in the same breath. The song's crisp rhythm and playful suspicion capture that contradiction without reducing it to plot summary. Ferrell's return also reconnects the fourth film to a musical identity he helped establish in 2010. The licensed songs operate more aggressively. Cameo's Word Up, Van Halen's Hot for Teacher, Blackpink's Boom Baya, Pitbull's Freedom, Right Said Fred's I'm Too Sexy, BTS's Dynamite, and other recognizable tracks appear across the movie. Subtlety is not the goal. These songs function like comic shortcuts, dropping an instantly legible attitude onto a scene before the audience can settle. A familiar hook gives a montage momentum. An overconfident lyric makes a ridiculous entrance even more inflated. The approach occasionally feels like a playlist competing with the score, but it suits Illumination's rapid-fire style. Recognition becomes part of the punchline. Then there are the minions, whose voices blur dialogue and sound effect. Pierre Coffin's invented language depends on phonetic texture, hard consonants for irritation, stretched vowels for alarm, breathless repetition for collective panic. Their speech is technically nonsensical, yet the emotional information is precise. Sound designer Jeremy Boker and supervising sound editor Daniel Laurie worked with re-recording mixers Gary A. Rizzo and Scott R. Lewis at Skywalker Sound, shaping the effects and final balance around those vocal performances. A minion scream must remain audible through engines, collapsing structures, music, and other characters without becoming painfully sharp. Controlled chaos. That is the mix. The effects team also gives impossible bodies convincing physical presence. Elastic limbs snap and wobble. Cockroach machinery clicks with insect-like unease. Gru's gadgets combine metallic precision with toy box absurdity. Foley, the performed sounds added to match physical actions, helps sell footsteps, clothing movement, and contact, even though none of those objects were recorded on a real set. The film exaggerates nearly every impact. But it rarely abandons internal logic. Heavy characters land heavily. Small minions rattle and bounce. Stretching has tension before release. You may not believe the physics, but your ears understand them. That sonic clarity prevents the film's crowded storytelling from becoming total noise. Pereira supplies continuity, Ferrell supplies pop personality, Coffin turns nonsense into character, and the sound team gives consequence to bodies that could never exist. The audio rarely pauses long enough to become lyrical, but perhaps that is exactly right for a movie terrified of stillness. Behind all that speed, however, lies a production process involving years of development, discarded concepts, and artists working across continents. The human machinery required to make animated chaos look effortless. The smoothest looking moment in an animated film may be the one that caused the most trouble. A character crosses a room, lifts an object, and delivers a line. Simple on screen. Behind it sits storyboarding, layout, voice recording, modeling, rigging, animation, simulation, lighting, rendering, editing, and sound. Despicable Me 4 disguises that machinery beneath speed. Its gags feel spontaneous, yet the movie emerged from years of revisions and thousands of decisions shared between Illumination's creative base in Santa Monica and its animation studio in Paris. The finished chaos is carefully manufactured. Universal and Illumination formally announced the movie in February 2022, setting its American theatrical release for July 3, 2024. Renaud later explained that he had already been developing the screenplay with producer Chris Meledandri, writer Mike White, and the Illumination team before agreeing to direct. He therefore returned knowing the basic destination, even though the route remained open to change. That distinction matters. Animated features cannot wait until shooting to discover themselves. Expensive production stages begin while story material is still evolving, forcing filmmakers to rebuild sequences that may already have consumed months of work. Patrick Delage joined as co-director for his feature directing debut, bringing extensive animation experience to a project whose scale demanded divided attention. Renaud remained responsible for the overall tone and storytelling, while Delage helped supervise the enormous chain of artists translating drawings and temporary performances into finished scenes. The collaboration also connected different generations of Illumination talent. Renaud had helped establish the franchise, while Delage had worked within the studio's evolving production culture. Animation direction is less like commanding a live set and more like conducting an orchestra whose sections may perform months apart. The movie's biggest behind-the-scenes struggle was conceptual rather than technical. Gru's family hiding in an ordinary suburb gave the filmmakers an accessible emotional premise, but it also threatened to make the film visually tame. Renaud said the team had to locate the oversized cartoon ideas that would keep the story recognizably Despicable Me. A complete reinvention would betray the franchise. Pure repetition would make a fourth installment feel unnecessary. That tension produced the movie's unusual mixture of domestic discomfort and superhero destruction. The family plot stays grounded. The minions are assigned to blow the roof off that ground. They did not begin as superheroes. Early versions placed the minions around affluent Mayflower, enjoying yachts and even traveling to Las Vegas. The lifestyle sounded colorful, but Renaud concluded that it was not generating enough comedy. The team relocated them to the Anti-Villain League, then revived a super-powered minion concept considered during Despicable Me 2. This is development in its least romantic and most honest form. Discard a sizable idea because it is merely amusing, recover an older one because it suddenly solves a new problem, then rebuild the surrounding story to support it. Even after the Mega Minion direction was chosen, the powers needed severe simplification. The characters had limited screen time, so every ability had to read instantly. Tim's tall body suggested stretching. Mel's single goggle naturally became the source of a laser beam. Other designs drew on rock-like strength and uncontrolled flight, with the graphic absurdity of the Fantastic Four providing a loose reference point. The powers were not assigned independently of character design. They grew from shapes audiences already recognized, allowing the animators to mutate familiar minions without losing their identities. The production also had to reopen digital assets created across 14 years of franchise history. Returning characters could not simply be pulled from storage and placed beside newer models. Animation World Network reported that older rigs and surface materials were updated, while Fred McDade, absent since the second film, had to be recreated because his original model was too old for the current pipeline. That is the hidden maintenance cost of a long-running animated universe. A live-action actor ages naturally. A digital character can remain frozen forever, but the technology surrounding that character keeps moving. Happy accidents still survived this industrial process. Poppy playing an arcade machine reportedly began as an animation test, a practical experiment designed to understand how the new character moved. The filmmakers enjoyed it enough to incorporate it into the final movie. That tiny story captures the best version of studio animation. Technique producing personality before the screenplay demands it. An animator discovers a gesture, the directors recognize behavior inside it, and a test becomes part of the character's life. Not every useful idea begins in a writing room. Sometimes it begins with an artist trying to make a digital teenager press a button convincingly. Voice recording required a different kind of extraction. Renaud explained that actors new to animation often begin too subtly because they are accustomed to letting facial expressions and body language complete a performance. Inside the booth, the voice must carry that missing physical information. He encouraged broader takes, even when performers worried they sounded foolish, because stylized animated faces need more energy than live-action close-ups. After a session or two, most actors adjusted. The embarrassment becomes useful material. The animators then build expressions and poses around vocal choices that may have felt excessive in isolation. By the time Despicable Me 4 reached cinemas, years of abandoned concepts, rebuilt models, and separated performances had been compressed into 94 minutes of apparent effortlessness. That is animation's great deception. The more labor involved, the less the audience should notice it. Yet, Illumination did not undertake this operation only to preserve a set of beloved characters. It was also protecting one of modern Hollywood's most dependable commercial machines. And the box office numbers would show exactly how valuable that machine had become. A film can miss the billion-dollar mark and still become one of the year's most valuable releases. Despicable Me 4 finished with approximately $972 million worldwide. $361 million from the United States and Canada, and about $611 million from international territories. Against a reported production budget of $100 million, that is not merely a successful theatrical run. It is evidence of a franchise operating with frightening efficiency. The movie did not require groundbreaking reviews, radical reinvention, or a decade-defining cultural moment. Gru, the Minions, and a clearly communicated family adventure were enough to produce the fourth highest worldwide box office total of 2024. Universal released the film domestically on Wednesday, July 3, placing it directly inside the Independence Day holiday corridor. It earned $27.2 million on its opening day and reached $122.6 million across its first 5 days, including $75 million over the traditional Friday to Sunday weekend. That 3-day figure placed it above the $72.4 million debut of Despicable Me 3, although below Despicable Me 2, Minions and Minions: The Rise of Gru. The opening was strong rather than record-breaking. More importantly, it proved that 7 years away from the main series had not weakened Gru's appeal enough to threaten the brand. The timing carried risk. Pixar's Inside Out 2 was still drawing enormous family audiences and earned another $30 million during Despicable Me 4's opening weekend. 2 animated films competing for parents, children, and premium screens could have forced one to collapse. Instead, the market expanded around both of them. Despicable Me 4 opened at number 1 while Inside Out 2 continued its own historic run. That coexistence mattered after a weak start to the 2024 summer season. Families had not abandoned cinemas. They were simply waiting for recognizable films that felt worth the cost of taking several people to a theater. Opening weekends create headlines. Endurance creates profit. The film fell only 42% in its second weekend, collecting another $43.6 million and remaining in first place. Its following weekends brought $24.4 million, $14.6 million, and $11.5 million, keeping the domestic total climbing long after the launch campaign had done its job. The numbers calculates a domestic multiplier of 481 from the 3-day opening to the final gross. For a sequel this deep into a franchise, that is healthy staying power. It suggests families did not treat the movie as a one-weekend appointment. Repeat viewing, school holiday traffic, and steady word of mouth kept the Minions working. International audiences were even more important, accounting for roughly 63% of the worldwide result. During the opening phase, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, and Australia ranked among the strongest territories, while Universal reported franchise best launches across numerous markets. The appeal travels because the series is designed to cross linguistic barriers. Gru's emotional situation is simple, the action is visually readable, and the Minions communicate largely through movement, tone, and fragments of multilingual nonsense. A complicated verbal comedy may lose force in translation. A yellow creature flying into a wall requires no translator. The $100 million production budget deserves context. It was substantial, but controlled compared with animated spectacles that can cost well above $150 million or even $200 million before marketing. Illumination's production model has long emphasized disciplined spending, reusable expertise, and globally marketable character design. Despicable Me 4 generated box office revenue equal to nearly 10 times its reported production cost. That does not mean the studio placed more than $870 million directly into its pocket. Cinemas retain part of ticket sales, while advertising, distribution, residuals, and talent agreements create enormous additional expenses, but the basic risk-to-reward relationship remained exceptional. Deadline's later accounting estimated $775 million in total studio revenue against $405 million in combined expenses, producing roughly $370 million in net profit. That calculation included more than theatrical ticket sales, incorporating home entertainment, television, and streaming value, while accounting for production, marketing, participations, and other costs. The figure placed the movie among 2024's most profitable blockbusters. Here is the commercial lesson. $1 billion gross makes a prettier headline, but profitability depends on what was spent to reach the audience. Despicable Me 4 stopped just short of 10 figures and still delivered an enormous return. The theatrical campaign also fed a longer commercial life. Universal prepared digital and physical editions with deleted material, recording session footage, and 2 additional Minion shorts, turning home release into another extension of the brand. The company announced standard digital availability for September 10, 2024, followed by 4K, Blu-ray and DVD editions on September 24. By then, the film had helped the wider Despicable Me series become the first animated franchise to cross $5 billion at the global box office. The fourth movie was not simply earning money for itself. It was increasing the value of every toy, attraction, short film, and future sequel carrying a Minion face. Commercially, then, the film succeeded by understanding exactly what it was selling. Not narrative innovation, reliability. Parents recognized the tone, children recognized the characters, and Universal recognized a release window where familiarity could become an event. Yet financial confidence and artistic approval are not the same thing. Audiences embraced the movie far more warmly than many critics did, creating a familiar franchise divide. Enormous popularity on one side, growing complaints about repetition and overcrowding on the other. The numbers settled whether Despicable Me 4 was a hit. They did not settle whether it was actually good. The most revealing number attached to Despicable Me 4 is not its box office gross. It is the 30-point gulf between its Rotten Tomatoes critic and audience scores. The film currently holds 56% from 166 professional reviews, while its verified audience rating stands at 86%. Rotten Tomatoes summarizes the critical response as an enjoyable sugar rush trapped inside an overstuffed structure. Viewers, meanwhile, largely celebrated the familiar mixture of Gru, Minions, and non-stop slapstick. Same film. Different expectations. Critics approached a fourth installment asking what it added. Families approached it asking whether everyone laughed. Metacritic tells a similar, though less dramatic, story. Its 52 Metascore places the film firmly in the mixed or average category, based on 36 reviews. Only 10 of those reviews were classified as positive, while 24 were mixed and 2 were negative. The user score sits at 6. 1 out of 10, favorable, but hardly ecstatic. That distribution captures the dominant critical mood better than a simple fresh or rotten label. Reviewers did not generally despise the movie. They found it professionally made, occasionally funny, and increasingly difficult to distinguish from a franchise operating on automatic pilot. The most repeated complaint was structural overcrowding. Gru's conflict with Maxime competes against witness protection, Gru Jr.'s rejection, Poppy's robbery plan, Lucy's salon disaster, the daughter's adjustment problems, and the mega minions. Empire praised the film's appearance and Gru's continuing charm, but argued that the overloaded plot lacked an engaging narrative center. Paste was harsher, criticizing the way characters become isolated inside separate subplots. Even positive coverage acknowledged the same weakness. The Hollywood Reporter called the story a chaotic mixture stretched thin, while still praising Mike White's suburban satire, the voice cast, and the Minions' superhero material. That agreement matters because the problem is visible regardless of taste. Maxime should be the narrative engine, yet he disappears whenever the movie visits another member of Gru's family. Poppy's storyline is lively enough to support a larger role, but it competes with the villain instead of strengthening him. The Mega Minions deliver the film's most marketable images while remaining largely detached from Gru's emotional conflict. Critics who disliked the movie saw narrative confusion. Viewers who enjoyed it saw variety. Both readings are valid. The film resembles a comedy buffet, disconnected, excessive, and capable of satisfying anyone who came hungry for individual gags rather than a carefully arranged meal. The warmer reviews accepted that design instead of fighting it. Matt Zoller Seitz wrote that the movie feels deliberately stitched together from comic ideas, connected by only the thinnest plot, yet found its irreverence likable, and admitted that the children at his screening laughed even harder than he did. His response identifies the film's strongest defense. Despicable Me 4 is often funniest when it abandons narrative obligation altogether. Gru humiliating himself, a minion misunderstanding basic responsibility, or Lucy transforming a normal social interaction into catastrophe. The randomness criticized as weak storytelling is also the source of the movie's most immediate pleasure. Reviewers also responded positively to the vocal performances. Steve Carell's Gru remained the stable center, with critics recognizing the affection beneath his irritated delivery. Will Ferrell's exaggerated French villain divided opinion more sharply, though his theatricality fit the franchise's tradition of enemies powered by wounded pride. Joey King's controlled menace as Poppy and Kristen Wiig's frantic energy as Lucy gave separate subplots personality stronger than their narrative importance. The cast could not solve the screenplay's fragmentation, but it kept that fragmentation lively. A lesser ensemble would have exposed how little connective tissue exists between the film's many attractions. The critic-audience divide, therefore, says less about intelligence than purpose. Adults reviewing animation professionally tend to value narrative development, thematic cohesion, and creative evolution. Children respond first to movement, rhythm, recognizable characters, and the pleasure of anticipation followed by comic failure. Parents may occupy the middle, noticing repetition while appreciating a movie that keeps younger viewers engaged for roughly 95 minutes. Rotten Tomatoes' audience summary emphasizes the experience as a slapstick blast, while its critic consensus emphasizes the overstuffing. Neither side is describing a different object. They are measuring success with different instruments. Awards' attention reflected that split. The movie was never positioned as the year's major artistic animation achievement, especially in a field containing the wild robot. Inside Out 2, Flo and Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. Yet Habib Louati won the Annie Award for feature storyboarding, recognition that supports what even skeptical critics could see. Individual sequences were staged with sharp visual timing. The film also received 2025 Kids' Choice Award nominations for Favorite Animated Movie, for Steve Carell and Will Ferrell's voice performances, and for Kristen Wiig's performance. Craft recognition and children's approval, exactly the territory where the movie was strongest. Culturally, Despicable Me 4 did not redefine the franchise. It confirmed its durability. The Mega Minions supplied fresh promotional imagery. Gru Jr. expanded the family, and the closing villain reunion rewarded longtime viewers, but no element transformed how audiences understood these characters. Critics saw that lack of growth as creative exhaustion. Families largely treated familiarity as the attraction. That tension leads directly to the final judgment. Beneath the noise, what does the movie actually say about fatherhood, identity, and change? And does its emotional core justify returning to Gru's world for a fourth time? The finale, and everything discussed from here, involves full spoilers, reveals what Despicable Me 4 has been trying to say beneath its frantic subplots. Maxime transforms Gru Jr. into a cockroach hybrid and turns the baby against his father, converting Gru's private insecurity into a physical threat. Gru has spent the movie worrying that his son does not love him. Now that fear stands directly in front of him, armed with pincers and controlled by someone else. He cannot solve it through intimidation. He reaches Gru Jr. by speaking with affection, trusting that their bond exists even when the baby's behavior suggests otherwise. The former villain wins by acting like a father. That resolution continues the franchise's central idea. Family does not erase Gru's darker identity. It gives that identity a purpose beyond himself. The original movie asked whether a selfish person could change through love. The fourth asks what happens after that change becomes ordinary life. Gru still enjoys gadgets, schemes, and the prestige attached to his criminal past. Poppy's admiration clearly flatters him. Yet he no longer measures success by what he can steal or whom he can defeat. His first instinct is protection. That evolution may no longer produce the emotional shock of the first film, but it remains the moral foundation holding this increasingly crowded universe together. Witness protection turns identity into the film's most consistent theme. Gru becomes Chet Cunningham, Lucy becomes Blanche, and the children receive new names and histories. None of them performs the disguise convincingly because their personalities refuse to remain hidden. Gru cannot stop behaving like Gru. Lucy approaches an ordinary salon job with the intensity of an undercover operation. Agnes feels genuine guilt over lying because honesty forms part of her moral identity. Their names can be replaced in seconds, but their habits, loyalties, and insecurities survive. The movie's point is simple and sturdy. Identity is not the label assigned to you. It is the pattern of choices you keep making when circumstances demand a disguise. Poppy complicates that idea by treating Gru's former identity as something worth preserving. To the anti-villain league, his criminal past is an embarrassment to conceal. To his family, it is history. To Poppy, it is legend. She does not want the suburban father standing in front of her. She wants the villain who stole the moon. Gru's decision to help her rob Lycée Pabon therefore becomes more than a nostalgic action sequence. It lets him acknowledge that the old Gru still exists without surrendering control to him. Redemption does not require pretending the past never happened. It requires deciding what parts of that past can be repurposed. Maxime fails because he makes the opposite choice. He remains emotionally trapped at school, defining his entire adult identity through a talent show grievance. His cockroach transformation looks like evolution, but psychologically he has not moved at all. That contradiction gives the villain more thematic relevance than the screenplay fully develops. Maxime changes his body while preserving every insecurity. Gru changes his values while retaining the same body, accent, and eccentric habits. One character mistakes mutation for growth. The other demonstrates that genuine transformation may be almost invisible from the outside. The suburban setting also carries a mild critique of normality as performance. Mayflower appears safe and polished, but its residents constantly evaluate one another through wealth, confidence, and social ease. Poppy Prescott's friendliness feels competitive. The country club turns leisure into another arena for status. Gru is technically living under an invented identity, yet the neighbors are performing too, presenting curated versions of success while concealing boredom, ambition, and, in Poppy's case, a passionate desire to become a criminal. The satire never becomes sharp enough to threaten the family comedy surface, but it adds a useful irony. Gru is the official imposter in a community where almost everyone is pretending. The Mega Minions occupy a stranger thematic position. They parody superhero culture by giving enormous abilities to characters with no judgment, patience, or sense of responsibility. Power does not improve them. It enlarges their existing flaws. Their bodies become stronger, faster, and more spectacular, while their minds remain gloriously unprepared. That is funny on its own, but it also mirrors Maxime's mistake. Transformation without maturity produces disaster. The film never pushes this parallel hard, perhaps because doing so would slow the jokes, yet the idea is present in every heroic pose followed by public destruction. Where the movie struggles is not meaning but concentration. Its themes are distributed across too many competing threads. Gru Jr. should be the emotional center, yet long stretches pass without developing that relationship. Margot's discomfort with relocation, Lucy's attempt to build a temporary life, and Agnes's crisis over lying could have deepened the family's shared experience, but each becomes a brief comic station. Maxime's resentment needs more interaction with Gru. Poppy almost belongs in a different, potentially stronger film about Gru mentoring a new generation of villains. The ingredients connect conceptually. Dramatically, they are often fighting for room. That fragmentation keeps Despicable Me 4 below the standard of the original. The first film had a clean emotional mechanism. Gru uses three girls for a scheme, grows attached to them, and must choose between ambition and love. Every major element pushed the same transformation. The fourth film has more characters, larger action, and smoother animation, yet less cumulative force. It entertains scene by scene rather than building toward an overwhelming emotional payoff. The laughter is real. The affection is real. The structure simply prevents either from deepening as much as it could. Still, dismissing the movie as empty franchise maintenance would miss why it works for its intended audience. Renaud understands these characters. Steve Carell continues to find vulnerability inside Gru's absurd voice, and Illumination's artists deliver physical comedy with exceptional clarity. Children receive movement, color, and minion destruction. Adults receive jokes about parenting, social embarrassment, and the humiliation of trying to appear competent. The movie rarely surprises, but it knows exactly how to create comfort without becoming completely lifeless. My verdict: Despicable Me 4 is a lively, overpacked sequel with a strong emotional idea buried beneath too many attractions. It earns a 6.5 out of 10, easy to enjoy, easier to forget, and carried by characters whose appeal remains stronger than the story built around them. Its legacy will probably not rest on artistic reinvention. It will stand as proof that Gru's world can survive enormous commercial expansion as long as the filmmakers protect one essential truth. Beneath the gadgets, accents, and yellow chaos, this series works because a former supervillain keeps choosing his family. He once wanted the moon. Now he wants his son to reach for him. That smaller desire matters more.